Okay, sorry, silence notifications.
Okay, I changed it.
There it is. My personal favorite is Heppa White.
Okay.
And I loved him because he was the cabinet maker, but the designer was his wife. Incorporate the new with the old because it just works. That's what I would look for. I would look for collectibles that could go in a nursery.
Yeah. Hi guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Reluctant Robbie. Thanks for checking it out. Today you are going to see part 2 of my series. We're going to be speaking with a business owner, Rosa. She has multiple businesses in California and in San Francisco. I love her story, and she's been doing it close to like 30 years, maybe longer. I don't want to date her. I'm just going to say 30 years. I love seeing a female business owner. I mean, I commend her, and I'm super excited. So without further ado, here's part 2 of my series. Thanks. All right, so we've got a real treat today. I brought my friend Rosa.
Hi.
And I am super excited because this video today, we are talking to business owners of vintage booths and antique businesses. And she's got a lot of experience, not only here in California, but also in Florida. So I'm super excited, so welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So can you tell me a little bit about your businesses or the amount of businesses that you do have?
Okay, so I fell into the antique business when I moved to Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, I have always been into antiques and into vintage items since I was probably nine years old. And even probably earlier than that. My mother, we were raised in Watsonville, California, here in the Bay Area. And I remember my mom taking us all the way to Santa Cruz and finding what we now call the Goodwill bins. There was this location in somewhere really remote where they had this big, huge warehouse with mountains and mountains of clothes and used items. And this was back when I was, what was it? 1980 probably, in the 80s. And so my mom would put us all into the car and this is okay, it's time to go shopping, because that's kind of how we acquired clothing. And I loved it because it was just a
hunt.
It's a hunt. And not only that, it was like treasure for me. I never really had a problem with used items and antiques or anything of that nature. It's all I knew. It was this really huge warehouse and it was a little dark, and so it was kind of like what would you say, like an adventure. And under the tables you'd find like the greatest toys, that people would let fall under the tables, and that was like my ultimate favorite, because that's where I would find the best amazing things. So that's kind of how I started in vintage, antiques, used items, and so I just carried on through my entire life.
Seeing the value in everything as it came across to you.
Right, yeah. Exactly. But when I first started my first business, that was when I moved to Jacksonville, Florida in 2005. I started with a small, tiny little bookshelf. And the mall was called Antique, Avonlea Antique Mall. It's one of the largest antique malls in Jacksonville, Florida. There's many there. And so any type of store that rents space to antique dealers is called a mall in the East Coast. And so basically, I went into these huge, it must have been probably over 8,000 square feet at the time. And it was located in Beach Boulevard in Jacksonville, Florida. But the store only stayed there for 4 months, and then it moved to a different part of town. So I moved with it. And then at that point, I acquired a bigger space.
So do you remember how much your first booth cost, or it cost to have a space in the shelves?
I do. So the bookcase, the very first bookcase was $80. And then when I transitioned into the new space, it was $150. Now, just keep in mind, I was also very pregnant. And so I was out to here, and I remember being like 8 months pregnant and having to move that whole booth over to the other store. So that was kind of challenging.
By yourself? Or did your husband help?
No, my husband's never helped. He
Okay,
never
so
really
you got in
involved.
there.
Yeah,
Oh
he
my
was
God.
always working. So I always have moved everything by myself. and
You're
done
like me. When
mostly-
I had to do yard work pregnant, I was like, I'm moving that rock. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. And I stayed there probably until I got pregnant with my second child shortly after that. And so I remember myself taking my kid, to like estate sales, when she was born, and then carrying another. So
Yeah.
in our community, it's in Jacksonville, everybody pretty much knows each other. And so people remember me. If I haven't seen them in a long time, they remember. It's like, you're the pregnant girl with the little toddler to the side and first in line in the estate sales. Because
Oh
it's
my
true.
goodness. Oh, I could never take my kids to my estate sales.
Oh yeah, I would take them to the estate sale. So my
my
girls
God.
were pretty good, and so my girls pretty much grew up just the way I did.
So that's a good actually leadway into the type of items that you sold
Right.
and where you get your items. So
Right.
when you first started, what type of items were you looking for at estate sales or places, and where were you getting them?
The reason I fell into estate sales is because when I was planning the nursery for my daughter, I was looking for certain items for the nursery. That's how I really, really started to look into older collectible items, because I wanted that one music box for her for the nursery. I wanted that one, mobile for the above the crib. And then I was also looking for, I think at the time, Trump and Ivana, she was doing her nursery. She was pregnant also with her first child, and I saw in one of the magazines featuring her whole nursery, and I didn't like everything because it was so gaudy, but to me it was just overwhelming.
Right.
But I did see a few things in that magazine that I was like, oh, I would love to have something like that in my own nursery. So that's what I would look for. I would look for collectibles that could go in a nursery.
Yeah.
And so shiny things, anything gold, anything brass, anything, furniture was also something that I was always looking for. I didn't want the traditional changing table
Right.
that you would find at the time when Babies R Us was open, because it's no longer in business,
Yeah.
right? So I was always looking for a sideboard that would be functional for all of the baby's items to change the baby. And so it was very, very much around the nursery.
Yeah.
And so whatever wouldn't sell in one, I would push to the other and push to the other and push to the other. And I made it a little side business too. And you can do antiques there too, if they're nicely painted or nice enough to
In
go
good
in there
shape.
and in good shape.
Yeah.
But I think I was like grossing about between $6,000 and $7,000 a month.
Wow, just
When-
from kids' baby stuff.
Definitely doing children's items, because that was what my
Selling.
world was at the time. If they needed a little table to do school, to do crafts, then I would go find the antique little table to do crafts, unless I wanted the actual pottery barn. Was really popular at the time, and still is, right? But I wanted a nice pottery barn, but I didn't want to pay the price.
Yeah.
So I would incorporate the new with the old, and that's kind of what most designers do, and that's how you maximize the amount of money that you make in this business. So I love antiques, don't get me wrong, I love them, but sometimes they're not appropriate in all spaces. And
Right.
so that's kind of how I've always managed my booths, my stores. I've incorporated the old with the new, but I do require 80 to 85% antiques in any business that I have, because you're calling yourself an antique shop.
Yeah.
So it has to have antiques. Yes.
And when you're buying, I'm assuming things that weren't too expensive, but selling them at like maybe 3 or 5x.
Yes.
Depending on whatever it was
Probably
and how special it was.
100% sometimes.
Sometimes 100%. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's really good profit margin.
Right. And keep in mind that when I started, we were able to sell things for a lot more than they go for now.
Right. The economy is different.
Right. And it also has to do a lot with, who your clientele is, where the city is, what people you're networking with and making money with, right? Like a good example of that would be the $1 Million Design through Netflix. I don't know if anybody has seen it, but you should watch it, because it kind of gives you a whole different perspective of the difference in money and level and all of that. But there's one of the designers there. He's an antique dealer, and he says I feature all of my items, and most of my business comes from my store. So most of the designers in that series don't have stores. They have businesses, design businesses, and they design for the very, the stars and
Wealthy.
the wealthy and the famous, right? So we're definitely not at that level, but
Yeah.
if you look at his store and if you look at some of the items that they feature, it's the exact same things that you see in our stores,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
so, but it's a different level.
Yeah.
And they do the exact same thing that I do, which is they incorporate the new with the old because it just works. And you just cannot, you can have a cabinet that's reproduced, but it's not the same. You know, the three huge cabinet makers are Hepa White, Sheridan, and then there's Chippendale. And so those three cabinet makers are timeless. I mean, they still reproduce them. They still make the same hardware, and they still, you know, these are all reproduced still to the day.
Yeah.
With the features of these cabinet makers. And so, and you kind of have to learn a little bit about the history.
Yeah.
My personal favorite is Hepa White.
Okay.
And I loved him because he was the cabinet maker, but the designer was his wife.
Oh,
So when you
of
look
course.
at it, it's a lot more feminine. The pieces are feminine. They're clean cut. They're not so fussy.
Yeah.
I love that cabinet. But you know, nowadays they still reproduce them and you still see them out there with the same hardware. And you can tell the difference by the type of hardware they use.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the tell.
Point where you're making enough money, what made you jump from the cabinet to a booth and then the booth to a store? Because now you have stores too as well.
Exactly. So that transition happened when my daughter started preschool. So it's very much linked to how I live my life, like with my family.
Whatever
and
you
what
can
worked.
do.
Well, what worked for me, right?
Yeah.
So my family is always and has always been my priority. Family comes first. And so my children came first. And so whatever I did, it had to be flexible to their schedule, you know, or our schedule.
Right.
And so I made the transition. I left Avonlea Antique Mall because Jacksonville, I don't know if you know this, Jacksonville is the largest city in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's only divided by 2 counties, so it's huge. It takes 45 minutes to cross the entirety of Jacksonville.
Yeah.
So I was way on the other side of the river, they would call it, and I'm in the west side of Jacksonville. And Riverside is kind of the medium. It's in the middle between the north and the south, the east and the west. And so
Yeah.
I kind of landed there because my husband also, his job was there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my daughter started preschool, or pre-K3, I basically started, I opened up a little space in that street called Park Street Antiques. 2010,
Okay.
right? So she started pre-K. And so I rented a space in one of the antique malls that they had there. It was a little bungalow, a little house. And so I rented a space there called Treasure House, and I started there. And then shortly after, I met a woman by the name of Carrie McCloskey, and she went in there, and 6 months later, she's like, you know, I'm looking for a partner to open a store. And she knew that I had children, and she also knew that it was very much, you know, everything was scheduled around my children. And so she says, how about we go 70-30? And I said, okay, well, let me think about it. I took it home with me and I thought about it, and I'm like, 70-30 is not going to cut it. I can't do that. It's weird.
Yeah.
So I go, it's going to be 50-50. And then I talked to my husband about how much time it was going to entail. And that's kind of how I got started. She asked me to be her business partner. We barely knew each other.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't even really know each other, but
Yeah.
we just,
So you started your business, or you opened a business, a co-business with somebody else.
yes.
And I'm assuming that business went well too.
Right. It's still open to the day.
Oh, it's still open.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. So we still have.
And are you full owner, or are you still co-owners?
We're still co-owners.
Oh,
In
okay.
fact, we actually took a third partner because we've both grown. And so I opened a second business about 5 years ago, right next to that shop. And the reason I did that
By yourself?
No, not by myself. Actually, I had a partner.
Oh, okay.
And that didn't quite work out. And then now I am by myself.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, not all partnerships kind of thrive.
Right.
Sometimes they work and sometimes they didn't. And that particular partnership didn't quite work, you know, for both of us. And so she left the business. I stayed with it. And so we both, now I have that store by myself. But that shop, it's called Robbie and Rosa Antiques, like the song, you know, like Pilaf, from France, Robbie and Rose. So, and my name is Rosa, so someone just came up with it. Why don't you call it Robbie and Rose? And I am French, a little bit French. So
You're like, that's perfect.
yeah, that's perfect. So I named it that, but it's really one house away from the other house. So it's on Park Street, and I have 2 businesses there. Yeah.
So now that you've been in this business for so long, and I think you're very successful. I mean, you've now expanded into other states. You're in Florida, now you're in California. You're setting up businesses here.
Yes.
What advice would you give to a new antique dealer or somebody who's just getting into the business, like myself, who only has one booth?
Right. Well, in this business, it's all about buying low and selling high, right? And so you have to understand the business. You have to get to know your items. You have to know what is valuable and what is not.
So what was the best thing you ever bought?
Okay, so the best thing I ever bought and made a killing.
And where did you find it?
So I found it in the Ramona Flea Market in Jacksonville, Florida, and it was a gentleman by the name of Chris, and he passed away since from cancer, unfortunately, about 6 years ago. And he was there every single weekend at the flea market, and I would go and look at his space and just pick up random things. But he had these two visor mid-century lamps, and they're about this tall and all aluminum. They were Danish and
beautiful.
I just thought they were really cool. And he's like, oh, just $5 for the set. And he gave them to me for $5. And then I took them home and like, really? And at the time when I looked at them, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll pay $5. No, because I didn't know anything.
Right. It's in your profit. It's in the wheelhouse that you like to spend. So yeah, that's good.
Right, exactly. And it was also items that I really don't look at very much. Mid-century, modern, 1960s, Mad Men. I was not really into that.
Okay.
I wasn't.
Yeah, you were into brass and bronze.
Exactly.
And
and so more ornate things, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought these were just really unique because they were like visors. The whole shade was made. It was built in, but it was a shade made of visors. I can't even, really describe it until you see it. But it was skinny. It was a skinny, like a candlestick type of a lamp with a dome made of visors. Very
pretty.
Jetsons.
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought, I'm like, okay, this is really cool. So I'll take them home. Yeah, $5, no big deal. And then I took them home, and my husband's like, oh, those are really cool. What is that? And so he's just started kind of looking at them because he was interested in it. And he's like, oh, there's like a signature here. And so we just started really looking into it, and we did a little bit of research, and I ended up selling them for $7,000 on eBay. So I mean, that was $7,000. $7,000. And so I've had other instances like that with other items, but
I've seriously got to go picking with you.
Never like that. And so that was really super exciting. And at that point, I think my husband was getting even more involved. I got him involved a little bit, And,
yeah, and now he's like, you're in the money.
Yeah,
I want to be in this too.
So he does go picking with me. That's the one thing that kind of saved our marriage, thank goodness, is that he was able to go picking with me every Saturday. Yeah. Of course, to his personal interest like golf, but and he has many golf things, but he started to see the profit margin and how amazing some of these things can actually be, and the worth and the value, and he's like, oh, this is really cool.